So I might be getting married next week. I don't know who she is though, but I know she's Elon Musk's daughter. You're all not invited. Thank you. Please subscribe and like this video. My friend vanished in the lake. Now he's back, and I know it isn't him. All of this started when a friend of mine, John, suggested we go up north to a large lake in Minnesota to do some ice fishing. Neither of us were new to ice fishing, and between us, we had just about all of the newest high end gear you could possibly need for doing something as bold as camping on a frozen lake in northern Minnesota for a week. So we went up there with high spirits and enough bait to make your local Walmart jealous. We made it to the lake early Sunday morning and drove out on the ice, something neither of us had done before as fishermen who had only fished the relatively thin ice of more southern lakes. It was high spirits, laughter, and shitty music coming from the local radio stations all the way to our fishing spot. When I got out of the truck, the freezing air punched me in the face, and my breath got sucked away into the wind with a white cloud. The weather forecast was perfect for the next week, with sub zero nights with sun and 20s in the day. We immediately set to work getting our shanty, a little two-man clam style built into a sled, on the ice, holes drilled, and baits tied. We were sitting on 30 feet of water, and little dots bobbed just off the bottom on the fish finder screen. We dropped our baits into the inky black water beneath us, and there seemed to be no force on earth that could kill our joy, as within seconds, two of those dots flew off the bottom and slammed into our baits. For the first couple of days, everything was going great. We were catching plenty of fish, the ice shanties stayed warm, and we were having an amazing time taking a break from the world. It wasn't until the third day that shit hit the fan. We had only checked the weather before going out, and as I mentioned, it looked perfect. So it caught us off guard when it got cold, really cold. That would have been fine if the wind hadn't picked up to the point that the canvas on the shanty whipped and snapped violently. The once pleasantly warm air inside it was wicked away faster than our propane heaters could produce it, and going outside risked getting frostbite in minutes. Beneath us, the ice groaned and cracked as rapid ice formation and movement from the wind strained it. I had grown quite accustomed to the sound of ice formation, but this was something completely different. It was like a constant thunder beneath our feet. As things started getting bad, every so often John would get up to do something. He repeatedly opened the blind on the window, retrieved his keys from his pocket and checked them, changed lures, and even checked the weather on his phone, even though we had no cell service. It was clear he was getting antsy about the inclement weather and wanted to be anywhere but on the lake. I said something before he did. Hey, do you want to pack it up and head in until this all blows over? He began reeling in his bait before responding, Yeah, I'm worried we're going to freeze to death out here, man. I hear ya. Go get the truck started. I'll start to get everything packed up here. John wasted no time getting out of the tent and sprinting for the truck. I was disconnecting the wires to the fish finder when I heard it barely chug to life. Amidst the din of the truck rumbling, ice cracking, and wind, there was a new noise. It caught my ear as I set the fish finder in the sled, and I stopped moving to listen. It was a faint crinkling noise, like someone was eating a bag of chips outside the shanty. Then, with a gust of wind that bent the support poles of the shanty, a snap. My stomach lurched as unexpected movement startled me. Ice flew past the opening in the floor where our fishing holes had once been. In my shock, it took me a couple seconds to realize what had happened. The metal stake securing the shanty had broken free of the ice, and I was now gliding across the smooth ice of the lake at blistering speeds. I didn't know what to do, so I did the only thing that seemed rational at the time. I pressed boots into the ice to try to use them as brakes. The metal crampons on my boots dug into the ice and stopped dead. In an instant, I was slammed to the ground with such force that I momentarily blacked out. I came to an instant later, tangled in the base of the tent, getting dragged along with it. In a panicked daze, I fought against the fabric, tearing at it like an animal in a cage. Eventually, it let me go, and I came sliding to a stop. I looked up, and immediately my eyes teared up from the cold and wind. Through tears, I could see the truck's headlights in the distance. Shakily, I stood and waved my arms in the air, trying to signal where I was. John saw me and began driving towards me. He was only about 100 feet away when I heard a boom like lightning striking right in front of me, and the ice shifted violently. I was knocked off balance and fell to my knees. I watched as the ice beneath the truck buckled, plunging downwards faster than it could fall, and a geyser of water and ice shot up from below. The headlights of the truck went out and it plunged into the water. I got up and ran towards my friend, trapped inside. I could just barely see him pounding on the glass of the side window in a desperate attempt to escape. The truck sank quickly, diving headfirst into the unforgiving waters. By the time I reached the water's edge, it was gone. Not a trace of it or my friend anywhere to be seen. I fell asleep there by the water. If I'm being honest, I almost hoped I would freeze to death there in my sleep. Unfortunately, I didn't. I woke up the next day feeling numb and hungry. A huge pile of snow had built up on my back against the wind, protecting me against the worst of the onslaught. It was softly snowing with no wind, and the place in front of me that had once been water was replaced with ice as if nothing had happened. I had nothing, not even my phone, if that was in the sled that blew away. The only thing I still had were my clothes and my meager survival skills. I knew I needed to get off this lake as fast as possible. There was nothing to eat out here, and eating snow would only make me colder. Looking around made everything that much more bleak. The snow was a perfect sheet of white, and the white sky merged into it seamlessly. There was no telling where the sun was in the sky, and thus no way of knowing where to go. I chose a direction and started walking, my aching body protesting with every step. After walking for a while, I stopped seeing the snow. Everything in my mind had become a uniform white, only my balance kept me upright and moving. Now and again, colorful shapes flitted into the edges of my vision and disappeared. Oddly, they didn't bother me. Through the snow of my own, likely concussed mind, a word popped out. Ganzfeld. I had taken a psychology class in college and learned about it. The Ganzfeld effect, when, in the presence of a uniform color and sound, your brain will compensate with hallucinations. I saw a deer run through the emptiness. A voice whispered at me to follow. A dog barked, a truck engine rumbled, and its hood was visible above the snow. All of it was completely and utterly fabricated by my mind. That's what I thought was the case too when the shape of an ice shanty faded into existence at the edge of my vision. It was a wooden hut that didn't look all that dissimilar to an outhouse. It was dead silent as I approached, and no smoke came out of its pipe. When I got near it, I shouted out, "Hey, is anyone there?" There was a shuffling inside, and a man came out wearing a heavy coat and snow pants. "Ah, hello there. What are you doing all the way out here with a storm like that last night?" I thought about telling him everything, but instead, I settled with, "My ice shanty blew away. I'm not sure where I am." "Well, that sure does sound like a predicament. Why don't you come in and warm up?" I took his offer and followed him inside. It was only marginally warmer than the outside. Certainly not above freezing, but it was better than nothing. The man grabbed a hunk of wood and threw it into the stove, lighting it with a match. "You want some fish? I got a good walleye I caught today." I hadn't eaten for well over a day at that point, and I would have eaten rocks if it meant I could fill my stomach. Eating fish would be a dream come true. "That sounds delicious, thank you." He cut fillets off a nice wye sitting dead in some water and cooked them on the stove. He handed both of them to me, and I ate them ravenously. By the time I was done, the light coming through the small window above the stove had dimmed, and sleepiness threatened to overtake me. The man noticed and said, "You can stay here tonight if you want. It's far too risky traveling alone at night. Tomorrow I'll get you headed the right direction." I thanked him and laid down on the floor next to the ice, falling asleep almost immediately. I woke up to the feeling of being dragged through the snow. I opened my eyes to darkness. It was just bright enough to see the silhouette of the man who had let me into his hut, dragging me by my feet. My hands were tied behind my back, and in my mouth was a gag. I wasn't dead yet, but I couldn't struggle as long as he was holding on to me, so I stayed still and watched him through slitted eyes. We came to a stop in a cleared area of snow. He let go of my feet and walked a few feet away, inspecting something that I couldn't see. Slowly, I shifted my body to get a look at what it was. It was a massive hole in the ice, some 6 feet by 3 feet, with a pile of thick blocks of ice off to the side. Sitting on top of those was the culprit, a gas powered chainsaw. The man picked up something out of the snow and set it next to the hole. He fiddled with it for a bit, and a flame lit up the darkness. He stood above the burning log and watched it grow. As he did, I noticed something odd, a minute detail that I hadn't picked up on when I had met him, but in the moment seemed as clear as day. When he breathed, nothing came out. As I watched, my own breath billowed out of my nose into the frigid air, but not even a wisp of vapor came from the man. Silently, I began moving my wrists to try to shake off the twine handcuffs. They were done over my gloves, and I slipped them off with very little effort. The ankle bindings would take much more work. I stealthily moved to bring my feet to my hands when the man whipped his head around to look at me. "Well, look who's finally awake. I didn't want you sleeping through this next part." I tried kicking myself away, but he walked over and grabbed me like it was nothing, dragging me over to the hole. With little fanfare, he pushed me into the water. The shock of the ice-cold water made my vision swim, and I gasped, the gag fortunately preventing most of the water from entering my lungs. I kicked and struggled to stay above water as the man, humming to himself, grabbed a block of ice and dropped it back in the water. He wasn't just going to let me freeze to death, but worse yet, freeze me under the ice to drown. My mind ran with ideas, and one caught. I stopped moving and allowed myself to sink. Grabbing the rope around my ankles, I undid it and kicked myself free. The second block had already been dropped in. Using all of my quickly dwindling strength, I launched out of the water and grabbed the man's leg as he grabbed an ice block. I pulled with all my strength, and he wordlessly plunged into the water with me. Twisting my body, I pushed my crampons into his legs and used him as a board to launch myself out of the hole. By some miracle, it worked. I flopped my way onto the safe ice and willed my body to sprint, following the trail left by my body as the man had dragged it. Looking back, I watched as the man calmly pulled himself out of the hole and sat by the fire. I reached the man's hut and immediately stripped my soaked clothes. Rummaging through the man's stuff, I was able to procure a coat, pants, and gloves. It wasn't warmer than my other stuff, but it would have to do. I ran far, far away from that hut. When the sun came up in the morning, I was once again completely alone on a pristine plain of snow. I could talk about the countless hallucinations over those next days, or the way my body got weaker and weaker from lack of food, but it was the water that nearly killed me. I was cold. The snow that I shoved in my mouth by the handful was far, far colder. I was only physically able to be warm enough to eat some snow every several minutes or so, and when I did, often I had to spit it out without getting hardly any water because my mouth froze. Combined with my excessive walking, this led to me being extremely dehydrated. Salvation came in the form of a tripping hazard. One night, as I walked through near pitch-black darkness, my boot collided with something hard beneath the snow. Excavating it, I found that I had come across an abandoned handheld ice auger. I couldn't see it, but tracing my finger along the blades told me that it would cut ice. I was ecstatic. Feeling energy unlike I had in days, I stood and began drilling my way through the ice. The sound of metal shaving ice filled the air in the darkness. My arms burned from the effort of cranking the auger deeper and deeper into the ice. I was beginning to have to bend over to keep going when the feeling of the ice changed. It felt wrong. Now and again, the auger would get stuck on something, and I would have to reverse it and attack again. With a final push, the ice suddenly gave, and I fell flat on my face as my auger plunged into liquid water. I yanked it out and put my mouth to the hole, greedily drinking the disgusting lake water. The water tasted metallic. It was just barely noticeable, and I certainly didn't care, given how thirsty I was. Once I drank my fill, I looked to the horizon to see the very edge of twilight illuminating the clouds, providing an obvious edge to where the ground met the sky. As it got brighter, I could see nothing besides the perfect plain of snow I had grown accustomed to, a blue auger, and the hole it had drilled in the ice. It wasn't the hole that caught my attention, though. It was what was around it. The ice shavings surrounding it were red with flecks of black. My heart jumped with fear, but I rationalized it. Surely it must be something natural, maybe some algae that froze into the ice. I crawled back to the hole and looked in it. Feet of ice and then something else. I began clearing the snow away around the hole. I could see a shape below the ice, but the snow that stuck to its surface wouldn't let me get a clear view. Taking off my gloves, I stuck my hands into the water and cupped them together. I splashed water over the ice, and it immediately became crystal clear. There, frozen in the ice, was John with a hole drilled right through his chest, his face contorted in anguish, as if my auger was the reason he had died. I felt sick. The water I had just drank threatened to come back up, but with some difficulty I forced it down. I collapsed to the ground and curled up, sobbing, nearly a week's worth of suffering finally bubbling over. I stayed that way for quite a while until the sun was high in the sky. The sun. I realized that for the first time, unfiltered sunlight was reaching me. I looked up and found that the sky had cleared, and on the very horizon, I could see a black line of trees. I stood and took one last look toward John before finally making my way back to land. I can't say it was much better once I got back there. Hospitals, amputations, all sorts. I lost all my toes, my right pinky and ring finger, and the tip of my nose. There were a lot of other complications as well that left me with a lengthy hospital stay and a massive bill. I've regained my ability to walk and I've fallen back into a normal life, besides the weekly therapy sessions. It's been a year since then. I'm only writing this story now because I got a knock on the door today. It was John wearing a coat and snow pants. In the center of his chest, the coat seemed to cave in. He smiled warmly at me and said, "Hey man, long time no see. Want to do some ice fishing?" Despite the cold, no vapor left his mouth.